welcome to today, Thursday, the 16th of May press conference. Today we'll be dealing with the anti-money laundering legislation. At our panel this morning is my second mic, to my left, Mike, and then hello. Yeah, the panel today is to my left, Mr. Joseph Harmon, who is the Shadow Minister responsible for public infrastructure and communication, and to his left, Mr. Winston Felix, who is the Minister responsible for public security. The press statement will be read by Mr. Joseph Harmon, and we will follow our usual rules. Please ask your questions using the microphone. State your name and agency. And let us first of all concentrate on the issues in the press statement. And if we have enough time, we can move to other issues. Thank you very much. Let me ask Mr. Harmon to read the press statement.
Thank you, Mr. Carberry. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen of the press. The press statement for today reads as follows. On the 7th of May 2013, the government laid and debated before the National Assembly Bill number 12 of 2013, the Anti-Money Laundering and Countering the Financing of Terrorism Amendment Bill 2013. The spokespersons for the government, in their argument before the National Assembly, sought to invoke principles of nationalism to persuade the members of the National Assembly to approve amendments to the tabled legislation by the 27th of May 2013. This date, the Attorney General, Mr. Anil Nandlal, posited was a date on which the country was expected to be assessed on the government's compliance with provisions of certain international obligations determined by the Intergovernmental Caribbean Financial Action Task Force, CFAT. The National Assembly committed the said bill to a special select committee which began its work in earnest on Thursday, the 9th of May, 2013. At its first meeting, APNU representatives on the committee requested all documents related to the bill to help it in making decisions on matters that we consider grave, weighty, and in the national interest. However, even before the committee met at its second meeting, the government is on record as saying that the opposition was stalling the process. We wish to make it very clear that the background documents which provided the reasons why there is a need for an amendment to the legislation were only downloaded to members of the committee in an electronic format on Monday, 13th of May 2013. The primary document, consisting of close to 103 pages, was in the hands of the government members of the committee since 2011 for their consideration. The obligations outlined in that document were therefore well known to the government, since the requirement for compliance with its provisions had also been well known to them for some time. APNU wishes to make it very clear that we will not shirk our responsibility for careful scrutiny of the amendments to this important legislation before the Special Select Committee on any altar, and more particularly on the altar of expediency. We will continue to work diligently, but are of the view that this is an emergency of the government's own making. Therefore, any failure to meet a deadline of the 27th of May 2013 lies squarely on the shoulders of the PPPC administration.
Thank you very much.
Let me further read an extract from a document which was provided to the Special Select Committee at our last meeting. And it is a letter from the Caribbean Financial Action Task Force addressed to President Donald Ramotar and dated April 10th, 2013. And the penultimate paragraph of that letter states as follows: we strongly encourage that this letter be disseminated to members of the government, the honorable leader, as well as members and all technical public sector officials involved in the AML CFT architecture, and that Guyana's report to the May 2013 CFAT plenary should be comprehensive, in writing, and submitted to the Secretariat well ahead of the plenary meeting, and in any event by May the 6th, 2013. So, ladies and gentlemen of the press, this rush to have the amendment to the Anti-Money Laundering and Countering the Financing of Terrorism Amendment Bill, these amendments, these requirements are well known to the government a very long time ago. So that to be pressing a select committee to complete work on an important piece of legislation like this, when the government was encouraged by the Caribbean Financial Action Task Force to share this letter which was sent to Mr. Ramotar, the president, to share this letter with us. And they only gave this to us when we have to require that they provide us with all the background documents. They only provided this to us on Monday. And this is the letter which points out their obligations to meet certain requirements of the provisions of the Caribbean Financial Action Task Force. So that's the statement, please.
Okay. Please, could you use the microphone for your questions, please?
Gentlemen, would you definitively say whether or not the time frame you have left is at all adequate to one, discuss and add or supplement whatever you need to do to this piece of legislation? Two, whether or not you as the APNU have any conditionalities like the AFC tying this piece of legislation or this piece of document, this piece of legislation to any other bills passed or to be passed by the National Assembly. And do you think at all, given the time you have left, whether or not it is adequate for the Parliament to have passage and possible enactment of this piece of legislation before the May 22nd meeting? It's not passage, but May 22nd meeting.
Okay, several issues here. The Special Select Committee is required by the 22nd of May. That is the next day the National Assembly is going to meet. So I see it a very tall order for us to be able to get through consideration of the amendment within that time frame. But I think I want to make this also very clear that it is our view in the APNU that the PPPC are trying to set up a situation where they can make a report to the conference that the opposition is stalling or the opposition has stalled on the passage of these amendments to the legislation. I think it's definitely, that is a course of action that they're taking. And I say this because of several reasons. One, the entire conduct of the Attorney General in these meetings has been one which says, y'all are going to pass this thing before the time or not. That is all he has been interested in. Secondly, the statements made by the Honorable Madam Gail Teixeira to the effect that the fact in relation to the bill, the fact that we said that consultation ought to be had with other stakeholders in this matter, they consider that to be stalling. But if the extract I read from the letter to the President encouraged the government to engage all of these persons even before we got to this point in time. So I am of the view that the entire public relation machinery of the PVPC administration is geared towards saying that the opposition has stalled in the passage of this piece of legislation, and therefore they are vindicated in what they are doing. They have not, they had, as I said to you, this was with them since 2011. And therefore, if it was a piece of legislation with which they were enamored, they wanted to take action on, they had a long time to do it. But it is our view that the PVP has no major interest in getting this legislation through. Because if this legislation were to be passed already, in fact, we already have the laws in relation to anti-money laundering. This is an amendment to certain sections of the law. So that compliance with the law, enforcement of certain provisions of the law, still has to be done. And I can imagine if all of this were done, the red flags that will be raised when the Caribbean Financial Action Task Force and the international institutions were to ask certain questions as to how could you build a hotel like the Marriott without having any declaration as to where the money is coming from, publicly. And there are several other examples of expenditure of funds which I am sure will raise a red flag. A red flag. And therefore, while we are concerned about scrutiny in this sector, in the committee, I don't think that it is in the interest of the government to have this piece of legislation passed. That is why they waited so long to bring it before the select committee, knowing fully well that as a responsible opposition, we have to take certain steps to ensure that any piece of legislation coming through that process is well thought out and well documented.
I asked you about conditionalities. Do you have any conditionalities?
You see, I think the AFC has gone out on record as making certain statements on this matter. We have said certain things even before this bill came out, during the course of the budget debate, right? And we asked for certain conditions, and we can repeat that on those conditions. We spoke about the establishment of the Public Procurement Commission, which we support the AFC in that line of thinking. We spoke about an increase in the wages for public sector employees and employees of Gaisupo. We spoke about an increase in the old age pension. We spoke about a reduction of the fees for crossing of the Berbice River Bridge. We spoke about the issuance of the television and radio license to the people of Linden. So this, among other things, we spoke about. Additionally, we want to make this also very clear to the government that the fact that they are underfunding a constitutional office, I think that the AFC, they have considered that, and I think that they are good. But what I want to make it clear also, I want people to understand this, is that if the government's intention in the first place is not to pass this piece of legislation, but just to claim that we are the ones that are blocking it, then we have to be careful that we do not fall into that trap that we're setting.
Just a clarification, you said the letter from the agency was to the president, was dated April 10?
Yes.
What year?
2013. April 10th, 2013.
Hello, yeah. Colin Smith from the Pakistan. Can you say what exactly in the amendments, what specifically in the amendments, what is it that you are uncomfortable with? And secondly, can you enlighten us as to what are some of the sanctions Guyana is likely to face if this legislation is not approved?
Well, that's a question that the AG should answer. I think they have been fuzzling and giving all sorts of vague answers in relation to these sanctions. The Minister of Finance has said that we are likely to be red flagged, that international companies seeking to do business with us will be hesitant to do business and things like that. So even that important aspect of the sanction, we are not clear about it. We are not clear about that, and this is something we've asked for clarity on. From all of the documentation I have seen, it is not clear to me what these sanctions are. It is not clear. I have read all of the documentations provided to the Special Select Committee, and from all of this, even listening to a presentation in the Select Committee by the Minister of Finance, it is still not clear what these sanctions are. So I believe this is it's a red flag that the government they're putting up there to scare people. The AG continues to say, well, this is something of national importance and national significance. And until now, we cannot explain what is it that we are going to face if we do not have this document, this specific amendment tabled and passed. There are several other conditions which they're required to satisfy. The government are required to satisfy. This is just but one. There are issues in relation to enforcement that have not been satisfied. So I don't understand how is it that the Attorney General and the Minister of Finance and Madam Gail Teixeira can be now laying the whole architecture of this arrangement on the altar of the passage of this piece of amendment in the National Assembly. This is just one portion, and there are at least 15 amendments to the Principal Act which we have to consider. At least 15 amendments. If you were to look at the amendment that has been tabled, the bill itself, and the explanatory memorandum attached to that bill, you'll see at least 15 sections of the act that are to be amended. And we have to go through these things very carefully.
Please, yes, just a bit of clarity, Council. We're saying that the APNU is not prepared to throw in its lot with the AFC, and the demands at this time for fear of being blamed to keeping the legislation back. Is that it?
I never said so.
Well, I'm asking. I'm seeking clarity.
No, I never said so. The AFC, they have taken their position, and the APNU, we are saying that, in our view, the government is trying to create a trap. What the AFC has done as a party, they are entitled to do so. Likewise, we are entitled to make our demands, which we have made. As I said, we have made these demands and we will continue to make them. And this is just about one aspect of the demands that we are going to make and the forum which we are going to use to making these demands. So we cannot, you see, the important thing is that if you rest all of your eggs in this basket here of passing this piece of legislation, when in fact the government whole setup is to say that you are making no effort whatsoever to pass this piece of legislation, then in fact they can just sit by and say, well, you don't want the legislation passed because you set up these preconditions. But I'm saying that the AFC as a responsible opposition political party, they have made certain statements. I do not say that we disagree with the AFC for making those statements, but I'm saying that we are making these statements here today. That we believe that the government has no intention of passing this piece of legislation.
So you're not in support of the AFC position?
I never said so.
I find that a very great leap in interpretation. But
I'm
anyway,
not saying you're supporting or
let me
you're not
make
supporting. It doesn't want to hear
make a comment
you're
here.
supporting or not. That's what I'm asking.
The comment here is this, that the first bits of legislation was the Money Laundering Prevention Act of 2000. That was superseded by the Anti-Money Laundering and Countering of Financing of Terrorism Act in 2009. And that was amended by the Anti-Money Laundering and Countering of Financing of Terrorism Amendment Act in 2010. Now, if you read the reports coming from the task force, it was quite clear that the government was in breach of its requirements from the very outset. So the fact is that it is not that the legislation did not exist. It is the fact is that there was no political will on the part of the government to implement that legislation. And that is the reality. And therefore, it is not just passing the bill, it is a commitment to the implementation of the provisions of the bill. That is important.
Just a clarification, Mr. Harmon, you said the government appeared to be laying a trap for the opposition parties. How do you, as a party, avoid that trap?
Okay, basically I think what we have to do is, as we bring now, making it clear to the nation that we are taking steps as a responsible opposition to scrutinize the legislation that is before the Select Committee. That we are working diligently in the Select Committee to ensure that this piece of legislation is properly done. That if it is not done in time for the 22nd of May or the 22nd of May, that is not our primary concern. Our primary concern is to ensure that we have a piece of legislation that is in the interest of this nation. Not in the interest of expediency, not by jetson several aspects of this bill that needs to be considered very carefully. This is what, as a responsible opposition, we need to do. And I think that there's some other steps which we are prepared to take to ensure that not just the Guyanese people understand this, but that when the government lays its report, because as I understand it, this letter from the Caribbean Financial Action Task Force makes provision for consultation with the opposition, with technical public sector officials and so on, so that it is not beyond us to consider submitting even to this plenary certain documents which lays out clearly what our position is.
Sorry, just allow.
Okay, thank you very much, ma'am. Ladies and gentlemen of the media, this amendment which is proposed is very important to the national security of this country. There can be no separation of drug trafficking and money laundering activities. One assists the other to operate. We have seen a number of issues in this country, particularly unexplained and heinous murders, which can only point in the direction of drug trafficking. We have seen challenges to the state when armed citizens can attack not one policeman, but a police patrol. I think that is a red flag that the government ought to take notice of and resolve to fight drug trafficking and money laundering. Money laundering because it gives strength to drug traffickers. Once they have large amounts of money, they do what they want. And so you weaken them by monitoring suspicious transactions and seizing the bill, the Anti-Money Laundering and Counter-Financing Terrorism Act of 13 of 2009 creates an arrangement for the setting up of a financial investigations unit, the AFIU. But we have to ask about the commitment of the government to the functioning of this FIU. Has it ever functioned? Have we ever had an investigation into any act of money laundering? Guyana is so innocent that we've never had any act of money laundering. We have had exports of drug through the airport. We have traced coconuts. That should have triggered an investigation into funds and so on by those involved. But we have had nothing which points to the commitment of the government to really fighting money laundering and countering of financing of terrorism. Secondly, in our own area here, while we have the amendments which are proposed, I would like to invite your attention to section 8 and 9 of the Act of 2009, where the Minister of Finance is responsible for appointing the director of the FIU. And the director can only be removed by the president. So here you have this public servant being boxed in by two politicians. One, the president, the executive, and the minister. One appoint and one can leave. Now, does that speak to the independence which ought to attend this office? And if there is no independence, if we find that there is no independence, then at this level, this bill was passed when the government had the majority. But should we not now seek to change this aspect of the bill? Of the act rather? And that is why I'm saying to you that this is a very important piece of legislation which the government and the opposition need to work together. But in my respectful judgment, we are interested in going in a particular direction, and the government is pointing fingers. The government has done nothing to investigate any suspicious transaction so far, and we are at position no movement. In the meantime, issues in this country are growing. We are seeing crimes and we are seeing threats to the state. It is my wish that the government will take this act seriously, because since the last quarter of November, the government knew that it had to report at a certain time this year. Yet, they brought it in May month for these little boys in the opposition to be beaten into shape to give them a response. I would like us to be treated with the respect which ought to be accorded by the Thank you.
Just before you, if you look at the 2009 Act, Section 110, Section 110 is very clear. As soon as practicable, and I'm just going to read the section to you, but not later than 6 months after the expiry of the financial year, the director shall submit to the minister responsible for finance a report concerning the activities of the financial intelligence unit during the financial year. The report shall comprise information on the financial affairs, operations, and performance of the financial intelligence unit, including the amounts paid into the consolidated fund under this Act. The report shall have appended to it the audited annual statements of accounts of the financial intelligence unit prepared prepared pursuant to Section 9(8). The minister responsible for finance shall cause a copy of the report together with the annual statement of accounts and the Auditor General's report thereon to be laid before the National Assembly within 1 month after he received it. Now, I leave it to your investigation and judgment whether a report was ever submitted in the National Assembly.
So just one additional point I think was raised earlier about the amendments. I said there were several amendments to the Principal Act. But in addition, there are other consequential amendments which will have to be made that are not yet before the committee. And these amendments have been notified. The government is aware of these things. An amendment to the Mutual Assistance in Criminal Matters Act 2009. Amendment to the Cooperative Societies Act, Chapter 8801. Amendment to the Securities Industries Act, 1998. Amendment to the Insurance Act, 1998. All of these, amendment to the Gambling Prevention Act. All of these are amendments, and also amendment to the Money Transfer Agencies Licensing Act. So apart from the act that is now, the bill that is now before the Special Select Committee, there are still several other amendments to other bills which are to be made to bring us in line with the requirements of CFA. And those things, those are not even yet before a Special Select Committee.
the levy section. Let's assume that the government agrees to your conditionalities. Could you, sorry, let's say that the government agrees to your conditions. Could you say what time frame the select committee would probably need to complete its work?
As I said to you, I pointed out that there are several amendments to be dealt with. And the select committee has to report to the National Assembly by the 22nd of May. Our next meeting is this afternoon at 4 o'clock. So you only have a couple of days between now and the 22nd. We have asked for these documents, we've asked for time to peruse them, we have perused them, and now we are prepared to go to the select committee to work. But as I'm saying to you, as I said earlier, we are not prepared to just motor along in this select committee just because an artificial deadline has been set for us. We are not going to sacrifice accuracy for speed.
Good, Art.
Just a clarification. You said that you wanted a piece of legislation, that your primary interest is in a piece of legislation that is in the best interest of the nation. Once you are satisfied that this legislation is in the best interest of the nation, are you going to support it in Parliament?
Of course, that is why we are in select committee. If the legislation satisfies all of the requirements, in fact, this is an amendment to existing legislation. It is not new. It's not new. It's an amendment. These are amendments to an existing legislation that was unanimously passed in the National Assembly. It is in our interest to see this type of legislation here in Guyana. We would like to see several persons who have what we call suspicious transactions brought before the court. We would like to see enforcement of the legislation. We would like to see all of this. But even if, by some stretch of the imagination, this thing were to be passed and the government goes to Managua and says, well, look, we have satisfied the requirements, what is it going to do here in Guyana? Will it automatically energize the Financial Intelligence Unit into taking action? Will it automatically give it the type of staffing that it needs to do the type of investigation that we require? And this is why I think Lance said earlier, it requires a political will to see that these things are done. And we are not satisfied that the government possesses that will to see the implementation of this piece of legislation.
Mr. Harman, with all the tools said, there is 6 days to the next meeting of the select committee of Parliament. It's at the select committee meets again today.
Yes.
Do you believe that the 6 days that they have, well, it's not 6 because I don't think we can count, do you believe that the select committee has enough time to analyze the amendments before them, the documents before them, and come to a concise decision for Tuesday for the 22nd amendment?
The select committee has there are three parties in the select committee: the government and the PPP, the AFC, and the APNU. As far as we are concerned, we have perused these documents. I said to you that we are prepared to go. There are questions which will have to be answered. There are experts which will have to be called to testify on certain aspects of this. And we have said initially that we believe that the process should be advertised. Now, I understand from the chairman of the committee, Madam Teixeira, that there was some advertisement in the newspapers last Sunday calling for persons who want to make submissions to the committee to do so by Friday. That is Friday of this week. So that if, that is tomorrow, so that if that were to be done and you have persons coming before the committee to make elucidations on their written presentations orally, then we might very well find that it will be hard pressed to complete the work of this committee by the 22nd. But as I said, There are times when it is known that select committees have worked on weekends, worked through the night and so on to be able to get things done. But I am not sure that the present mood within that select committee is one which really is engendering that type of speed in getting things done. We, as I said, we are going to be very careful in what we do, and we will not be maneuvered in any way just to ensure that something is done within a certain time. The funding for the Marriott, the last I heard, in fact the last I read, a statement from, I believe, Dr. Lanchan, reporting on what Mr. Brassington, the head of NISIL, said, was that the financial arrangements were all tied up. All right, it was all secured. Now, if you recall, when this project was first mooted, when it was first reported in the National Assembly, the understanding that we had was that this was going to be a public-private partnership in which the public input was going to be 10% of the 51 million United States dollars to be spent on this project. So as far as we understood, that would be 5.1 million US. That was going to be our exposure, 5.1 million US. Now, you've all seen the state of the Marriott where it is. And until now, we don't know whether there's been any private involvement in the financing of this project. We don't know anything at all about it. And so if there was an active financial intelligence unit, that will be one of the first inquiries they will have to make. Where is all this money coming from to build a hotel of this nature and of this size and so quickly, and you don't know where the money is coming from? Up to now. Up to now. And now I read this morning in the newspapers, a matter came up in the National Assembly about the impact that the Marriott will have on maritime shipping and so on coming into the harbor, and about the placement of the Marriott in front of the lighthouse. Now I'm reading in the newspaper they're going to remove it and put it on top of the Marriott. See, we are fixing things, rearranging things and so on just to satisfy a narrow interest. We remove a piece of Guyana's history. Since we were small, you're reading in your books, the exercise books and so on about the lighthouse. In fact, there are products named that they had a match factory with a lighthouse in it. And now after all of these years, just for the purpose of building something like that, we're removing that and we put it on top of this concrete structure. I don't know what impact that will have on maritime shipping and so on. And these are questions that should have been answered in an environmental impact assessment. All of these are questions which would have had to be answered. But we're doing things and just going along and doing things we do.
Gentlemen, two things. Given the recent action or lack of action of bills passed by Congress, what guarantee do you have that these amendments will be passed on the 72 one? And my other question, and very seriously, is in your meeting yesterday with the State Department representative, did this issue came up at all? The money document bill or the work of the Parliament, and what, if any, pressure was brought there on your part to work and get this passed within the time frame?
I'll let Lance answer the second one. But the first one in relation to the bill, I think the President is on record as saying that he will not assent to any bill which he didn't agree with in terms of.
And your amendments?
And our amendments might very well, that's the point I raised in the select committee, that we may make amendments that you're not comfortable with. So that even if the select committee were to finish its work and to report to the National Assembly, on the floor of the National Assembly, that bill still has to be debated. It's not going to just go on a report and then it goes through like that. It goes straight to the office of the president, he signs it. So there are certain steps which have to be taken. And I'm not sure that if there are amendments with which the administration is not comfortable, that it might find the pleasure passage. You know, because we have an Attorney General who has made it clear in the National Assembly that there are certain bills that he will not recommend that the president signs. And sometimes I wonder whether we are in the midst of a certain level of incompetence or a certain level of a lack of appreciation for matters of this nature. When the Attorney General goes off on these rants and raving stuff that he does every night on the television.
The Attorney General seemed to have developed, and let me use a nice term, a penchant for propaganda. And he seemed to be reveling in as a propaganda minister. But let me answer your question concerning the meeting we had with the State Department representative. The money laundering legislation was not a specific area of concern raised in the discussion. The representative was more interested to know what was happening in terms of the National Assembly, and particularly with respect to the cuts in the budget and the implication. In other words, what she wanted to do was to understand the rationale of the opposition with respect to developments in the National Assembly. And that was the concern more than anything else. Of course, the issue of the money laundering bill came up. But basically, what we had pointed out to her, and what I pointed out during this press conference, that this is not the first time we have a money laundering bill. And therefore, our concern is a concern not only about the question of the amendments to the bill, but also the government's commitment to the implementation of the provisions of the bill. And that, to us, is more important than just simply passing the bill. Okay, if you have no further questions, ladies and gentlemen, let me thank you very much for being here, and let me look forward to seeing you again at our next press conference.